Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is May 9th, 2019, and this is episode 137. Politicos is a BC politics podcast. Tell us what you think of the show by leaving us a review or get at us on social media. Most importantly, help us build the show by throwing us a couple bucks a month at patreon.com/politicos.
Scott Delanoboom.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. Welcome back from Europe.
Thanks.
How were the Low Countries?
Great. I really enjoyed the Netherlands.
On today's show, we're going to talk about the Green Wave that you missed and the Norman trial, which is not a thing anymore. We're going to talk about the big money laundering reports that were released today on a later date, after we've had some time to digest them. David Eby released the second phase of the German report, which covers real estate, luxury cars, and horse racing. And Carol James also released the Finance Ministry's report that it commissioned. So there's lots in there, including the fact that I think there's something like 20% of real estate transactions in this province were done with cash, which is cool. That's a thing. People just have money to drop on houses and condos, and everything is normal. But we'll talk about those later after we've had some time to read them. Politicoast is in partnership with BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for a free trial to have unique coverage of the BC legislature delivered to your inbox every morning. Listeners to Politicoast enter the offer code CITIZEN for access to a special rate. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, go to britishcolumbiatoday.ca. If you have any feedback for us at the show, email us at podcast@politicoast.ca. First up, Elizabeth May is no longer going to be alone in the legislature. The results of the Nanaimo-Ladysmith by-election came in on Monday night, and the Greens didn't run away with it, but did pretty well and put a nice gap between them and the second-place Conservatives.
Yeah, they definitely did better than expected going in. I think our predictions were kind of NDP hold because it's been a safe NDP seat, and there wasn't any reason to believe they wouldn't be able to keep it, but they came in a third.
Yeah, the Greens' Paul Manley, who's the candidate who ran for them in the federal election in 2015, got 15,000 votes, 37% of the vote share. Conservatives came in second with 10,000 votes and 25% of the vote. NDP just under 10,000 votes at 23%, with their sort of star candidate, Bob Chamberlain from the EBCIC. The Liberals did not have a good night, falling down to 4,500 votes and 11% of the vote. And Jennifer Clark of the People's Party scored only 1,200 votes and 3%. And then there were a couple others in there who combined did not get even 1% of the vote. Turnout was 41%, which is a significant drop from the 75% in the federal election, but that's normal for by-elections. I think the most impressive thing on the raw votes are that Paul Manley actually increased the Greens' raw vote share. In 2015, they got 14,000 votes, and so they picked up another 1,000 votes, despite that huge drop in turnout. Every other party bled votes, like you would usually do during a by-election, so good work for the Greens. So what does this mean for each of the federal parties?
Well, obviously it means the Greens aren't just an Elizabeth May party and can win seats on their own. So, good sign for them. The Greens have been doing well at a bunch of provincial elections, so, it's, I think, a sign that the Greens are becoming a more serious party in federal politics. Moving on to the NDP, though, it's not good for them. Like you said, they had a fairly high-profile candidate, and it was considered a safe NDP right. If they can't hold that, and they're not in government, so they don't have the government disadvantage that often comes in by-elections. So when you think about it, there shouldn't be a reason they would lose.
It sounded to me in some of the post-analysis like there was a lot of disorganization and just misread signals. Sheila Malcolmson went on record in a quick scrum. Someone asked her what she thought of the by-election, and at one point she said, I really didn't think Trudeau would even call it. She thought she had gotten so close to the point where Trudeau could have just played a numbers game and stretched it out, because there are 2 other vacant seats that have opened up since then where it doesn't look like there'll be by-elections. But if you asked Elections Canada, I think they might have said very clearly, yeah, there will probably have to be a by-election.
In fact, they did say clearly. We talked about it ways back before the by-election was called. So, it's just a dumb error on their part that her resignation was timed in such a way that she thought she got out of them having to call a by-election when she didn't.
But even after that, they still had a few months to put together an election campaign. And even if they weren't going to, they were going to need one in October anyway. So it seems like things weren't there on the ground. There wasn't a very strong campaign office. It sounded like Chamberlain and most of his volunteers came in from out of the riding, and so there wasn't a big buy-in from local supporters, whereas Paul Manly built that up over the last 4 years and didn't cruise to victory, but did a fairly reasonable showing. The other thing that came out, which honestly should have been talked about before the by-election, was that Paul Manly actually wanted to run for the NDP in 2015. He put his name forward. During the vetting process, I guess someone looked at his record and started asking him about, your dad, former NDP MP, that's great, but, what's he doing over in Israel and Palestine? And what's this you've said about Israel and Palestine? And as far as I can tell, nothing he said was like anything other than human rights should be respected.
He was also pretty critical of the NDP, too, on that.
Yeah, I guess he'd criticized Mulcair for, quote, muzzling Libby Davies over criticism of some of the Israel occupation of Gaza. It still smells as a bit heavy-handed, and you push away a candidate like that who then, the NDP won the riding with Sheila Malcolmson, who I have nothing but respect for, but Manly seems to have found a different home where he could get elected. And that's not Jagmeet Singh's fault. It's arguably Tom Mulcair and his staff, but have things changed? Or do they just have new, different challenges?
I think it's probably new, different challenges.
On the other side of the aisle, though, the Liberals have nothing good to say about this result. They dropped 12,000 votes. They went from second place to fourth. This might just be people didn't want to show up because it's a by-election and who cares? Or it might just be a really bad sign for the Liberal fortunes come October, at least here in BC.
Yeah, there's definitely a chance of it. The enthusiasm has definitely drifted away quite a bit from the Liberals. It's been a long time since I think the Liberal MPs held that riding, so it's a little hard to say. But yeah, it's definitely not good that their voters didn't feel the need to turn up.
And it's hard to say whether it's buying a pipeline that was probably pretty unpopular on Vancouver Island, electoral reform, SNC, or some other just general exhaustion or, lack of enthusiasm. Yeah, Liberals have a tough uphill battle if they want to maintain government and have BC MPs as part of that government. Why didn't the Conservatives do better, though, is the other half of the question. Because this has been a Conservative riding in the past, and there have been Conservatives elected in that area. If the Liberals are doing poorly, if the NDP can't get their shit together.
Well, they got a almost identical vote share from last time. In fact, slightly higher. Obviously, raw votes is a little less, but they did kind of hold steady, which has kind of been Andrew Scheer's thing, I guess, because he hasn't really done much to kind of grow the party and its appeal.
It's tough, though. The Conservatives are riding higher in the polls than they were in 2015. The Liberals are doing so bad that you'd want to see to pull ahead a little.
That's a national polling, for one thing. It doesn't always break down nicely on the riding level. And where those people who voted Liberal last time go might split differently in Nanaimo-Ladysmith than the country as a whole.
Well, and I guess the only other party worth making fun of is the People's Party, who only managed to get 3% with their anti-Soji candidate, Jennifer Clark. This is the fifth, I want to say, People's Party candidate to lose, and 4 of those, I think, have now gotten under 5%, because there were 4 by-elections at the same time as Jagmeet Singh's.
I thought there was 3.
There might have been one more before that, but the People's Party have only hit 10% in a by-election once in the campaign against Jagmeet Singh in Burnaby South. Every single other candidate's gotten 2 or 3% now. Is there any point to Maxime Bernier continuing on into October, other than just to be annoying in the background?
Well, he's kind of committed himself to it now, so he's going to do that regardless. But also, where the by-election's being called, I don't think it's been particularly favorable or fertile ground for the People's Party. So, that might be playing a role too. But, yeah, for the most part, they haven't performed well. They haven't really caught on. And, part of that may be that Andrew Scheer has been desperately trying to close any gap between him and Bernier, which, is not great because Bernier is not what you want to be following. I'm just going to fall back on the tried and true, you can't read too much into by-election results. So it's hard to say, but still, it's, I think, going to be unlikely that they'll pick up anything in the coming election. Bernier might keep his seat, mostly because of his strength in his home riding.
That will be the one People's Party seat to watch in the election. For Nanaimo-Ladysmith, it looks like it'll probably be a largely second chance for all of these candidates when they go back to the polls in October. It's now Paul Manley's to lose. He's got a lot more profile than he had, and he had enough to win it. He's going to be on the national stage because he's one of 2 Green Party MPs at a time when Greens are electing people from Vancouver City Council to BC Legislature to the PEI Legislature. Not many places in between, but maybe that'll change, they'll tell you.
Yeah, and it also helps build that kind of Vancouver Island bastion of Green Party support, which is where they're going to be most likely to pick up new seats, I think. So the geography is helpful too.
And the Greens may have some better news coming, as Elizabeth May was telling CBC once again that Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott are having conversations with her, and maybe there'll be an announcement by June. There's no comment from either of those other women yet about their political futures, but there's also no comment that this isn't under consideration. And maybe at this point, the Greens are a better fit for them than the Conservatives or even the NDP. Maybe Jane Philpott could fit with the NDP, but Wilson-Raybould's allegedly a bit more socially conservative, not like far-right conservative, but a bit more on the hesitant side than the federal Liberals were.
I'm not sure I'd read too much into this. This seems like a party leader trying to keep a news cycle going and get a little press out of it. The fact that they haven't denied it's maybe a little telling, but I still wouldn't read too much into this.
In any case, for now, there are officially 21 quote-unquote independents in the House of Commons. That is, parties without official status, where I think you need 12 MPs. The Bloc Québécois has only 10. The Green Party now has 2. The Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, a.k.a. Aaron Weir being a shit, has 1. The People's Party has 1. There are 7 independents, 6 of whom are former Liberals, who've either left caucus or been kicked out of caucus, and the other being Tony Clement. And then there's 2 vacancies where there will not be a by-election until the actual election. Nevertheless, those independents don't get very many privileges in the House, despite closing in on 10% of the seats up there. But thus is our legislature. So I don't know, maybe we'll see some of these independents, or at least the Bloc, re-elected in the fall. And maybe they can have some bigger voice, because it gets tiring listening to the same 2, sometimes 3 party leaders. At very least, this makes a pretty good case that Elizabeth May should be in the debates next year.
What's the requirement?
There's a 3-pronged test. I think you have to have 2 of an MP, get a certain percentage of the vote nationwide, and run candidates in 2/3 or more ridings or something. So Bernier is also going to try to claim that.
Yeah, we have to had the MP elected under the party banner, so it's big question mark over whether Bernier is going to be able to get those requirements. But yeah, Mace at this point seems fairly confident to be in the debates. Moving on to segment 2, Norman Watts. The Mark Norman trial that has been slowly brewing in the background of Canadian politics has ended before it officially began, as earlier this week, the Crown withdrew charges. So Vice Admiral Mark Norman had been charged and relieved of duty over allegedly leaking cabinet documents related to shipbuilding contracts. And there were definitely some questions over A, whether or not he did it, and B, concern over this as to whether or not the government was politically kind of interfering a bit in this to get their desired outcome, as the contract in question was quite politically charged a bit, and there was some suggestion that this was retribution for Norman's efforts to get the Davies shipyard to award the contract.
So back in the Harper era, there was this need to award a shipbuilding contract. The details aren't actually important.
I mean, they kind of are, but not to this.
Well, which contract was needed. But the government decided to single source it from the Davie shipbuilding because there are only like 3 shipyards in Canada.
Yes.
Davie, Irving, And the other one that no one ever talks about.
C-SPAN, the one that's located in this city.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
Because we never get anything, because we're on the West Coast.
Yeah, anyway, this needed to be done fairly quickly because the military had run out of supply ships, and if you want to send your other ships places, you need to keep them supplied. So it was a rather pressing need that needed to be filled, and the Conservative government had decided to move in a direction that would emphasize getting a replacement supply ship rather than necessarily going out for the full, long bidding process that could have taken years.
Now, one of those other major shipbuilders, the Irvings, have a lot of political clout. I mean, all of them do, but the Irvings are especially known in Atlantic Canada for their ability to just know everyone and have influence. And I guess they found out about this single source, weren't happy, and pushed the government to open it up to a bid where they could try and undercut Davy. Harper's cabinet didn't care. Election happens in 2015. New government that's all about transparency and accountability and doing things differently. Trudeau wants to have more open bids. That was a big thing with the F-35s. So this goes out to tender, but somewhere along the way, the media starts getting leaks about all of this controversy and the sort of brewing behind-the-scenes scandal. And the Liberals, I guess, need a fall guy. And Mark Norman, it looked like, was that fall guy for a while. But it was never clear that it was him, even though it might have been.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, I believe that there were 73 people in the loop on this. And part of the reason the charges were dropped is because, well, the defense brought to the Crown's attention a whole bunch of other factors. So what had happened is the Privy Council office had initiated an investigation into the leak, then referred it to the RCMP, who, in conjunction with the Public Prosecution Service, charged Mark Norman. Now, it turns out they didn't actually interview Mark Norman at any point during this, nor did they interview any of the people involved in the previous government and that shipbuilding contract and all the decisions made there.
Including 3 cabinet members, Jason Kenney, who's now Premier of Alberta, Peter MacKay, and Aaron O'Toole, all of whom started talking to the defense, it turned out, as in working with Mark Norman. But not only that, earlier this week it was also announced that Liberal MP who's retiring, Andrew Leslie, was also planning to testify on behalf of the defense.
And former commander of the Army, colleague of Mark Norman, would have probably been involved in many of the procurement discussions.
It basically was starting to shape up like it was going to be Team Trudeau, or hashtag Team Trudeau, and a couple friends, versus like the entire defense establishment, previous government, which is partisan,
well,
fine.
Not necessarily the entire defense. There's some suggestion that the chief of defense staff, Norman's boss, didn't want to go with the sole source contract.
It was shaping up to be a bad trial for the government, though.
Yes, especially because for a government that seems to keep a lot of notes, none of the notes seem to have been kept on a bunch of the meetings. There was allegations that the government, including senior PMO members, were hiding stuff and not turning over when required, fighting subpoenas for those documents. It was brewing up to be a fairly nasty fight, and there was definitely concerns that there was politically motivated decisions at work here and influence towards prosecution decisions.
And a lot of this was coming out sort of slowly from Norman's lawyer, Mary Heinen, who's building quite the impressive profile for herself as a defense lawyer. I believe she was the one who defended Gomeshi, which most people criticized her for, but she did her job well. And in this case, she managed to drag the government day in and day out on this, kind of on the back burner because it's not as flashy, I guess, of a scandal as SNC.
It didn't get a huge amount of press coverage, but it was definitely something people were watching for and waiting to blow up. And the trial was scheduled to start in August, which meant it had the potential to run through the election, and that would have been probably pretty bad for the Liberals, having senior members of their government called to testify in this and have a key theme of the defense's questions be about political interference in prosecutions.
Now, the official line from the Crown is that there was this sort of crossed the threshold of we didn't have enough evidence, we didn't have enough case, so it triggered the automatic drop charges kind of situation.
But that just raises the question of why they brought charges in the first place and why the RCMP didn't interview key people in this affair.
I think those are all really great questions. And the most frustrating thing about this decision, which is probably the right one based on the fact it sounds like they didn't have anything, the most frustrating thing is that we won't get answers. With no trial, there's no hearing of the truth, no hearing of the evidence on both sides, whatever it may or may not be. NDP are obviously calling for a public inquiry into this because let's have inquiries into anything, but it seems like a good time to sort of go, what was all this about then?
Yeah, there's more unanswered questions than answered ones at this point, and ideally there would definitely be some sort of public investigation or inquiry into this, especially because the government is now on the hook for both sides' legal costs, as they announced they would be covering Mark Norman's legal bills after they'd previously refused to.
Like, the whole situation just leaves me kind of frustrated because there's no conclusion to it. There's been some summaries it took us a bit to explain. It's unfinished, and it's going to have to remain that way.
Yeah, and I have a bunch of things I don't entirely get on how, okay, if they were leaking cabinet documents from the Liberal government, what's the role of the previous Conservative staff in this? And there's a bunch of stuff that I don't even really follow along in exactly how it's all supposed to piece together, which I'm sure the prosecution would have laid that all out had it gone to trial, but it sounds like a complicated mess.
Well, and we didn't even touch on the element of the story, which is the journalist who was breaking the stories got hired by the Liberal government as a comm staffer. His claim was it was totally unrelated, and it was not an effort to buy him off to stop talking about these things. But it looks like that, and I don't know that we necessarily need a cooling off period between people going from journalism into the government, but that exists for lobbyists and some other realms. Maybe it's something to look at if we look at this on a broader picture, just so those questions don't get asked. The whole thing is a mess.
There's also one other member of the public service that is also being charged in relation to this, and as far as I know, those charges haven't been dropped yet, so there may be some details coming forward on this.
But in any case, sort of dodges a bullet for the Liberals, but leaves this
It's still,
air of mess.
Yeah, they haven't come out of this looking good, and while this is probably the less damaging path than having Jerry Butts and Michael Warnick on the stand in the middle of an election campaign, it is still, not very good. It plays on many of the same themes as the SNC Lavalin scandal, which is helping out big corporate friend of the Liberal Party and political interference in prosecution decisions. It's just kind of builds that on those same issues, and it's one more kind of straw on the camel's back.
Well, moving on to quick takes, someone else who's in hot water this week is Lynn Bayek, where the Senate has voted as a body to suspend her till the end of the session. I believe without pay. That was the recommendation of the Ethics Committee that reviewed her decision to not take down racist, anti-Indigenous letters from her website that her constituents sent her and that she needed to publish because free speech. And now she is claiming martyrdom, as always. I mean, there's a whole 15-minute speech where she supposedly references Orwell and other totalitarian acts. But I like the quote here that she said, "Parliamentarians have not had their freedom of expression threatened like this since the events that led to the enactment of the Bill of Rights by the English Parliament on December 16th, 1689. I think she's referring to the Glorious Revolution. I don't know my English history well enough, but that's getting some obscure references for parliamentarian geeks.
Yeah, it is a little obscure. But what's the obvious solution then?
And in that case, it was I think a Catholic monarch threatening to silence or shut down the legislature. This is the legislative body itself saying, stop it. Oh, you're not going to stop it? All right, we're going to suspend you as a majority vote. It wasn't Trudeau kicking her out. It wasn't the Conservative Party. It was her peers. And the Senate is an appointed body, so I don't have much sympathy for senators. in general.
Really should be easier to fire them or ideally unelect them.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other can of worms.
I don't know what'll happen after her suspension ends. I guess she'll get to come back, and that will be her penalty box period. But for now, she doesn't get to vote on things like, I think Bill C-69 is the big controversial one going through the Senate right now, the modest reforms to the environmental assessment process if you're the Liberals, or the Stop All Pipelines Ever bill if you're Jason Kenney. We should talk about that bill sometime.
Well, moving on to our next item. Andrew Scheer has started to lay out some policy positions after, well, having just spent the last few years just attacking Trudeau and everything. He's now starting to lay out what a Prime Minister Andrew Scheer would do, specifically making a speech on foreign policy. For the most part, this is fairly standard Conservative Party foreign policy positions, but there's a few things worth noting, such as the desire to move the Canadian embassy to Jerusalem, which I think is a bit of a departure from previous Conservative Party. Like there may have been an appetite for it among certain segments of it, but there's always been the understanding that it would be a bad idea to do so. So they've never actually done that.
Yeah, the global norm, mostly within the UN, as most countries want to get along well with, have maintained their embassies in Tel Aviv. Trump said, I don't care. Right-wing evangelical Christians want me to put it in Jerusalem. I'm going to put it in Jerusalem and piss off the Palestinians and most Arab countries and really provoke people for
it's like needlessly provocative, and that's why most serious statespeople, even if they I think it should be in Jerusalem, don't actually say there or try to move it to Jerusalem.
But that's not the only pro-U.S. stance he would do. Scheer would also have us join a U.S.-led missile defense program because I guess we're still in the Cold War.
So, in the defense of missile defense, it's, yes, the Cold War's gone away, but nuclear threats haven't. You still have North Korea, who's developing increasingly sophisticated missiles. Ideally, having a way to stop that would be good. Even if the chance of them being deployed are relatively low, it would be a decent insurance policy. Now, there's some very serious technical challenges with making such a system work, which is, I think, been the bigger stumbling block than should we try and protect ourselves from missiles.
I think the pragmatic issues are less salient for me than the geopolitical kind of, is it really in our best interest to keep building a global our foreign policy around being the U.S.'s minor partner? I get we're right next to them and we're always going to have them there and we shouldn't piss them off. But Canada's always done best, I think, when we've played that middle power kind of peace broker. We're in the middle. We're friends with everyone, but enemy of no one.
Except we're really not. We're part of NATO. If the U.S. is attacked, we are obligated to join their defense. And if the U.S. is under that big a nuclear threat, we would also be too.
I'm just also saying, with Trump, do we trust that allyship as much? Apparently Scheer does. So
Trump is a temporary thing. Whether it's after 2 or 6 years from now, he will no longer be president, and there's longer-term things to think about.
Yeah.
Hopefully 2.
Or
sooner if he gets impeached.
Well, then we have different issues.
So, those are perhaps some of the more controversial ones in there. There's the ones that make a fair bit of sense, like in upgrading our submarine capabilities and improving our ability to patrol the Arctic. Seems good. There's treating China more as a potential adversary, or at least nation to be concerned with, which seems more it's not an unreasonable position to take. There's definitely concerns to be had about China's growing power and how they'd exercise them, whether or not all that would be in Canada's interest. And the Liberals have at times, I think, been too willing to overlook potential concerns there.
Yeah, Scheer here calls for a, quote, total reset on China and calls the country the, quote, strongest propagator of authoritarian values in the world, more so than Russia. Maybe that's true? I don't know. It's tough to think about who is the worst country in the world in terms of authoritarianism. What was Harper's initial approach to China? Because
he was pretty standoffish for the first bit.
Because each Chrétien, Harper, Trudeau have kind of all been all over the place on China, and none have been successful, frankly.
Yeah, Harper started off taking fairly strong stance against China, and over the course of his time as prime minister, took the rough edges off that.
Like, it's such a tough country to deal with because it's so massive and its economy is growing so fast and it holds so much political influence across Asia and now the world that there's not a simple solution of just saying, well, we need to be tough with China. It's like, well, we're a tiny country relative to them. They don't care what we do. That's not to say we shouldn't stand up for human rights. I don't have a good solution, is all I'm saying.
It is a tough one, but I do think the foreign policy should be, or at least our policy towards China should be at least more skeptical of some of their moves.
I mean, all in, I am happy to see Scheer finally start to outline something about what he would be about. It would be great to see the NDP start to outline what their foreign policy would be, as though it would matter. Scheer has promised that he'll have a climate plan for us. We're still waiting on that. I think we're still going to be waiting on that for a little while.
I would put even money on we'd still be waiting for it on Election Day in October.
So yeah, there's some reasonable stuff in here. There's some stuff that makes me a bit more worried, and I guess that's par for the course with conservative politics, from my point of view at least. Well, Andrew Scheer is talking about what he would do as Prime Minister. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is rolling out a few more announcements and pre-election goodies almost. Well, he's still got the chance. I'm going to combine kind of three things that have happened in the past week. One, he made this announcement that the federal government is going to look to offer free menstrual products or period products for workers in federally regulated workplaces, public servants, RCMP, employees of banks, telecoms, or transport companies. Nice, simple, good idea. Really pissed off Maxime Bernier, who started complaining about what's next. Is the government going to fund toilet paper? Which they do at the workplace.
Is the government actually funding this, or are they just requiring companies supply it?
In the RCMP, I guess they would be funding it.
Like, I think Air Canada would just have to buy the menstrual products, not have the federal government buy it and give it to them.
Yeah. It was a good idea to offer period products to all students in BC schools. Doing the same for federally regulated employers seems like a good idea to me. The other change that they implemented was to reduce the ban on gay blood, essentially, donations from 1 year to 3 months. So Canadian Blood Services has a ban on anyone who is a man who has sex with men, is the way they describe it, from donating blood because they think it's risky. This has been something the Liberals said they would get rid of, and the Liberal Party has adopted policy saying they will get rid of it. And they managed to bring the ban down from 5 years to 1 year, now to 3 months, which really begs the question of why not just get rid of it entirely as a ban and just reformulate the questions around the activities and not the person.
I have no answer to that.
No, yeah, there's no good
That's
answer.
a rhetorical question,
Yeah.
so.
And the third thing that I didn't actually put in the show notes, so it's a bit more of a surprise to you, is the government is also increasing the Canada Child Benefit. They announced this week. More money for parents. So 3 goodies in 1 week almost suggests there's like other bad news out there for the government. Like maybe that whole 15 minutes we spent talking about a trial they dropped.
Yeah, that seems good. The Canada Child Benefits being a big success. So upping that seems good. But yeah, it also seems like one of those pre-election, we're just going to sprinkle goodies everywhere in hopes you'll forget about the giant scandal that we were embroiled in for the first 4 months of the year. Well, moving on to the provincial level, there's been some sparring in the BC legislature over what to do about the problem of people driving with illegal guns. Yesterday, Liberal MLA Marvin Hunt introduced a private member's bill, the Prohibiting Driving with Illegal Firearms Act, which seems redundant because it's already illegal to drive with illegal firearms.
I guess this would create a provincial motor vehicle offense in addition to the criminal code offenses.
Yeah, so that under this bill, it would make it an offense to drive a vehicle containing an illegal firearm, and people could face prison time, fines, and a 1-year driver's license suspension. Now, this is a private member's bill, so it's probably not going anywhere. But nevertheless, Public Safety Minister Mike Farnworth weighed in on it and said, well, what's the point in this? Our new civil asset forfeiture bill means we can just take people's cars if they have guns in them, or illegal guns.
I mean, he specifically said, civil forfeiture is a lot tougher. You have an illegal firearm in your car, you're going to lose your car.
Which seems grossly disproportionate, kind of. Like, we're talking, losing a asset that could be worth tens of thousands of dollars at a minimum here for an improper firearm storage offense or an improper possession offense. Like, take the guns, give the jail time, do all that, but does taking the car really help? And like, taking this to its logical conclusion, improper storage of a firearm is a crime. Like, you can be charged with that. If you don't properly lock a restricted firearm in your house, can the government take your house? Like, this seems to be the big problem with this, is that like a lot of civil asset forfeiture is really grossly disproportionate, and the burden is much lower.
I mean, speaking of disproportionate violence, state violence in this case, it reminds me of the scene in Sin City where the protagonist goes after the main villain at the end, and he kicks his gun away and he goes, I take away his weapon, and he shoots him in the crotch and he goes, both of them. This is, I take away his weapon, both of them, because cars are lethal weapons as well, just not often used as such. I reached for that analogy, but yeah, no, I agree. Everything here is redundant. The Liberals' bill is redundant. As you point out, the federal criminal code already covers this. The civil forfeiture bill is arguably unconstitutional, and if it is constitutional, it's just cruel and needless. Let's focus on the actual illegality and not just try to be vindictive in some tough on crime mentality.
Yeah, also, why take away the driver's license for a year thing? Like this seems to be one of those things that I get that driving is a privilege, not a right. But at the same time, presumably as part of the probation and, rehabilitation part, you're going to want the people charged with this to re-enter society, get jobs, all of that stuff. And, it's one thing to just have to take public transit if you live in Vancouver, but for large parts of this province, a car's kind of necessary to get to jobs. And taking that away seems needlessly vindictive and counterproductive.
Well, Farnworth's comment wasn't the biggest bozo of the week. Today, Rich Coleman and Laurie Thronis were once again at the March for Life, giving a speech in support of pro-lifers or against abortion. They weren't the biggest provincial bozos of the week. The Ontario Progressive Conservative MPP, the young one who said we're going to see abortion banned within our lifetime, he might be, but provincially here in BC, Darryl Plecas, I think it was last night, earns the honor of the most bizarre statements. He was giving a speech to the Lower Mainland Local Government Association, where there's 150 local politicians gathered to listen to him, and he's doing the keynote. And it sounds like things went off the rail pretty quick as he turned from his notes and decided to ad-lib some thoughts about leadership. So according to Darryl Plecas, leadership is important, but it's not the only value because, lots of places have good leaders like the Mafia or the Hells Angels. Even Donald Trump is really popular.
Does anyone think he's a good leader, though?
He's not even really popular, people kept pointing out. Very few if any, polls have shown him have an over 50% approval rating, and he lost the popular vote. There are many people who like him, but the whole speech, I guess, went so off the rails that people started heckling. These local politicians started heckling Plecas halfway through his speech, to the point where by the end he was apologizing for offending people. So at one point, he starts talking about First Nations consultations and somehow compares it to sexual assault, saying, look, he consulted first. No, it's stupid. And just bizarre and weird, half-formed thoughts that were not the best to throw in a speech. I kind of get what he was trying to get at about the leadership thing. There are strong leaders, but...
Yeah, effective leadership isn't necessarily the same as, moral leadership. Ideally, they should be together, but they can exist separately.
He almost went down the Hitler made the trains run on time line, but luckily he didn't get that far. But don't ad-lib, Daryl. It's not good. You're not good at it. I have some respect for him in the way he's handled being the speaker and trying to expose things, but when he gets going on something, it just gets going. And ironically, this actually came out on the same day, basically, as when his Speakers Forum report, this consultation on how to improve democracy in BC that he's been doing kind of in the background. The report on the first year of that and those roundtables came out today, and we'll probably read through that and give some thoughts on a quiet week. But it's just such a distraction to have him going off about the Hells Angels and getting another weird round of headlines. But he hasn't been in the news for a while, so welcome back, Daryl Plekas. One of the more memorable speakers of BC Poly history.
That is definitely true. But I expect we'll be hearing more from him somewhat shortly, as the LAMC now has their Ben McLaughlin report, so that will probably be released at some point. And I'm sure Daryl Plekas will have some interesting words to say about it. And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. If you're a first-time listener, make sure to subscribe and let us know what you think. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. If you have ideas for the show, feel free to send them to us. Our intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikoff. Thanks for listening.